Africa's push for self-determination, economic integration and reparations, tackling historical injustices while laying the groundwork for a unified future. In the continued pursuit of justice and equity, the conversation about reparations emerged as a critical dialogue that requires the collective attention and action of Africans and all people of African descent on matters of historical crimes, whether they stem from colonialism, transatlantic enslavement, apartheid, or systemic discrimination against Africans and people of African descent.
Your Excellency, the work ahead requires a unified voice, a clear strategy, and unyielding commitment. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to working together to develop policies and frameworks that will support reparations efforts across Africa and beyond. We must continue to advocate for stronger legal and institutional mechanisms at the national, regional, and international levels to ensure that reparatory justice for the historical trauma inflicted on global Africa is not just a conversation, but a reality.
At this gathering, the world was called to never forget that Africa is a victim of two colossal and compounded injustices in the form of colonialism and the slave trade.
Decolonization alone in itself was not a panacea. Political independence did not free countries from structures based on exploitation and decades of economic, social, and institutional underinvestment. It is high time for reparatory justice frameworks to be put in place. Second, Africa was under colonial domination when today's multilateral system was created, and that injustice endures. Look no further than the United Nations Security Council.
When he's turned to address the summit on this somber theme for the very first time, President Boko, using the best way he knows how, took a leaf out of legendary African poet David Diop's poem Africa to protest and depict the evils of slavery and colonialism. Through Diop's highly witted pen and employing the world's acclaimed poet's figures of speech, President Boko painted a complete picture of Africa, including its pre-colonial glory and colonial suffering, as the continent traversed a difficult journey through time and evolution before springing beautifully with hope after being freed from the heavy chains of oppression. Besides the theme of reparatory justice, the deepening conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where M23 rebels captured Goma in late January, also became a key talking point at the summit. The violence there has resulted in the deaths of more than 2,700 people and displaced over 7 million people who had to flee their homes across the country. To this deepening crisis, the meeting of the Peace and Security Council condemned the activities of M23 and its supporters and called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, cessation of hostilities, and an immediate withdrawal of all uninvited foreign forces in the DRC.
We have always known as a party that in this world where there is so much interdependence, there is no country that can operate in silo or without working with other countries. So it's important that as Botswana we continue to interact, we continue to entrench our relations with the rest of the world. That's why we made it very clear from the beginning that we are going to adopt a human rights-centric approach to foreign policy, which means that following the electoral process in Botswana, where for the first time after 58 years, power changed hands between parties and the exchange was seamless and peaceful, we're hoping to bring these ideals to our African brothers, to the world, to say that we are for dialogue, we are for peaceful resolution of conflicts, and it is important that we are part of the grander scheme of things in terms of finding solutions for African problems.
Also at the summit, President Boko engaged in high-level discussions with fellow African leaders and participated in the 34th African Peer Review Mechanism Forum of Heads of State and Government, where governance and economic development issues were discussed. The leaders kick-started dialogue on the modalities of establishing a continental credit rating agency born of deep concerns over chronic low credit ratings from international credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor's, Moody's and Fitch, which they believe stifles member states from accessing global capital markets to achieve economic growth and progress.
Despite the progress we have made, the international rating agencies have often presented a distorted and unhelpful view of our economies, and their assessments are pretty much characterized by unpredictability and inconsistency. The lack of objectivity on credit rating of our economies, on the one hand, has severely hampered our ability to access capital, and on the other, limited our capacity to integrate with the global financial system.
It is clear that one of the issues that are keeping Africa's economies down is this animal called the cost of capital. I think we need to deal with it. And the way we are dealing with it today, yesterday, progressing the implementation, actualization of the African Credit Rating Agency is correct. So we're going to address that one variable, if it's the only challenge that is outstanding, to tick the box for us to make that investment, public or private. And I'm focusing here not on consumption expenditure. I'm focusing on investment expenditure, projects that will lead to growth of our economies.
The African leaders also discussed the impact of U.S. aid cuts, urging the continent to focus on self-sufficiency and mobilizing and scaling up domestic funding for development projects.
mme ditiragalo tsa bošweng tse la tsela Amerika jaanong le tlhalositseng gore ga lena go tlhola le tswelela le thusa mo go tsa botsogo ka mananeo a go ntse go ikaegilwe ka one ebile go beilwe mo go one jaanong ke sengwe se se kgotlileng sa ba sa tsikinya mahatsi a Afrika gore ba lemoge go hita jaaka ba kile ba lemoga gore jaanong boikarabelo ja go tlamela batho ba bone mo go tsa botsogo bo mo maruding a bone.
At the summit, President Boko was appointed chairperson of the African Leaders Malaria Alliance, the role he assumes when Africa is at the crossroads grappling with aid freeze by the U.S.
I accept the role of ALMA chair and pledge to build upon the remarkable legacy you and our predecessors have established. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I step into this role, I am acutely aware of the immense responsibility ahead. The task before us is both challenging and urgent. Our progress has stalled, and the hard truth is that we are not on track. A perfect storm of threats, insufficient resources, climate change, biological risks, and humanitarian crisis threatens to undermine our efforts. The upcoming Global Fund replenishment will determine whether we sustain our progress or fall further behind. The Southern Africa region is bracing for malaria upsurges this year, given the heavy rainfall we are experiencing, creating mosquito breeding sites. The recent decision of the U.S. government to suspend aid has without doubt knocked us even further off track, especially given we did not have sufficient time to prepare ourselves, with life-saving commodities either lying undistributed or with delayed delivery. Securing the resources necessary to combat malaria and fill these critical gaps with renewed energy is imperative. Africa must urgently rise to the challenge by mobilizing domestic resources, including by drawing down on the resources in our emergency funds and increasing our health budget allocations.
For her part, former President of the Republic of Liberia and former chairperson of the African Leaders Malaria Alliance, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, appraised the summit about the 9 End Malaria Councils that have been established and have collectively raised over $125 million in the fight against malaria.
African Union member states face financing gaps to sustain existing levels of malaria-related services between now and 2026. Additionally, to get back on track and eliminate malaria, we will need to mobilize another $5.2 billion annually to fully finance our national malaria plans.
Amid the hurdles in the fight against malaria, Egypt was given a malaria-free certification for the year 2024 by the incoming chairperson President Boko and Dr. Chikwe Ihekuza, WHO Assistant Director General and acting WHO Regional Director of the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Africa. On the margins of the summit, President Boko engaged in a presidential dialogue at the 8th Africa Business Forum, which called for a renewed commitment to activate regional value chains to unlock Africa's economic potential. The forum, which addressed challenges and opportunities for Africa's industrial development, attracted heads of state, private sector leaders, policymakers, and experts.
We need to be able to identify and strengthen these channels of collaboration amongst African countries so that we are able then to have our product available on the African continent, because it will be quicker, it will be easier. We also have another very lively, robust entity which is called the Botswana Vaccine Institute, which has produced quality vaccines, especially in relation to foot and mouth disease. We've made these available to some of our neighbors in the region, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and we want to make these available and produce them now at scale.
In his closing remarks, Mr. Claver Gatet, Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, emphasized the importance of leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Area to foster regional value chains.
With over 60% of the continent's population under the age of 25, Africa has the world's largest and fastest growing youth demographic. Yet, today, millions of our young people remain unemployed or underemployed, with their potential stifled by limited access to economic opportunities. But Excellencies, distinguished delegates, this is not acceptable. We must create sustainable jobs by leveraging regional value chains, empowering youth-led enterprises, and harnessing digital innovation. And this is why this forum is timely. With over 65% of Africa's workforce engaged in agriculture, why does Africa remain a net importer of food? Why must we continue to rely on external markets when our agro-industrial potential is unparalleled? Similarly, Africa's livestock sector, valued at over $65 billion remains largely underdeveloped, in spite of the immense capacity to drive industrial growth and food security.
415 possibilities feasible, and I'm sure there might be even more. We finally concentrated on 4 pilot strategic sectors, including automotive, pharmaceuticals, cotton and apparels, and infant food as key strategic priorities.
The forum ended with a renewed commitment to regional integration, value chain activation and industrialization, and the signing of the UN Economic Commission for Africa and African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which will facilitate the implementation of Africa Free Trade Area and fostering economic integration across Africa. On the sidelines of the summit, the president had a series of bilateral meetings. He met Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali. Botswana and Ethiopia have long-standing general cooperation agreement signed in 2017, which affords the two nations an opportunity to collaborate in various sectors. In a quest to strengthen Botswana healthcare system, President Boko and the Minister of Health, Dr. Stephen Modise, met a delegation from the leading private funder for reproductive health causes worldwide, the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation. The president also had a meeting with Africa's richest person and the founder of the Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, to explore business opportunities across various sectors that can boost the Botswana economy. This is in alignment with President Boko's government's agenda to transform the economy, attract foreign direct investment, and to court investors. President Boko also engaged with one of Africa's leading investment companies established by African governments, Africa 50, which is exploring areas of investment in Botswana and across the continent. The company focuses on funding of medium to large-scale projects that have a significant development impact. For her part, the First Lady, Kaone Boko, who had accompanied the First Citizen, also took her position at the Organization of African First Ladies for Development to share her vision on a child protection initiative she would soon be launching called Mpepu. The organization elected a new leadership at its 29th General Assembly held under the theme building on Beijing, First Ladies championing women's leadership and rights through African heritage. This theme coincides with the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and aligns with the African Union's 2025 theme of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. As he concluded his Ethiopia trip, President Boko reminded Botswana and the diaspora of the critical role they play in shaping the future of a new Botswana. He hailed the community in Ethiopia for their role of great ambassadorship, urging them to exert themselves even further towards plowing their trade here at home to advance the country's development.
Allow people to subject them to probing, unpleasant scrutiny. The president must also be subjected to examination, intense scrutiny. By habit, training, and practice, I'm a lawyer, and I've retained my office of advocate. I'm still an advocate of the courts under the jurisdiction of the Law Society. So if I veer out of line, they have the power to discipline.
The community had converged at the newly constructed multi-million Pula Botswana Embassy Chancery, which the President, the First Lady, and his delegation also toured. Botswana's Ambassador Alfred Boang congratulated the community for ushering in a new government by casting their vote in October of 2024, further underscoring the importance of Botswana's participation at the African Union Summit.
African Union re tsa le khotalama ha se a kopaneng a bokopano ba Afrika ka thwahalo e tseneletseng le gona ebile go supa seo gore Botswana ke leloko le le ikemetseng sente le le nonohileng ebile nna le maikaelo le maitamo a gore le tswelele le ntse le dirala kontinente ya Afrika.
On behalf of the community in Botswana who plies a trade in Ethiopia, Ms. Boto Bayendi assured the president of their support, urging the new government to continue making the voice of Botswana to be heard regionally and across the globe. Having been privileged to be among very few Botswana absorbed by the African Union Commission, Bayendi called for government's intervention to help the nation to meet the quota.
To expose their citizens, Haribidza Rere
can member states bring us seconded staff? Ya be le go tlhoela ya gore ba ba dumetse a le rona re nne le go develop that appetite gore when this institution call for interns, call for secondment, lo ba dumetse Batswana re na le bokgoni re ta re itshupa e be ba re kgatlhegela gore hira.
Meanwhile, on leadership of the organization, Angolan President Joao Lourenço took over the rotating chairmanship of the organization. He took over from Mauritian President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani. The ceremonial head of the AU is elected by the Assembly for a one-year term. The Commission also elected Djibouti's Mohamed Ali Yusuf as its new chairperson. With economic integration, credit reform, and visa liberalization set in motion by the continental leaders, Africa is certainly asserting itself as a unified force on the world stage, and as the wise man would say, true independence requires not only economic self-reliance, but a unified African mindset.